The third time, Austin Vance caught me in bed with another man. I didn't panic. I didn't scramble to put on my clothes, and I didn't bother to explain. Sienna Montgomery, the head of the Vance Group's legal team, stood at the front of the crowd. Mrs. Vance, this is your third strike of marital infidelity. According to the prenup, you will walk away with nothing and waive all custody rights to your son. Austin had long lost his patience. The look in his eyes was pure disgust. He threw the divorce papers right at my face. The first time, you claimed you didn't even know the guy. The second time, you said you had no idea how you ended up in that hotel room. 3 strikes and you're out, Elena. What's your excuse? This time, he expected me to make up another pathetic lie. But I said nothing. I just quietly picked up the pen, signed my name on the divorce papers, and prepared to vanish from his world forever. I wondered, though, now that I had finally given him exactly what he wanted, leaving with absolutely nothing, not even our child. Why was he the one losing his mind? Sienna snatched the signed papers away instantly, as if terrified I would change my mind. She turned to Austin and said, "Mr. Vance, it's signed." Austin stared at me, his brows knitted tightly. He probably expected me to tear up the papers, like I did the first 2 times. He expected me to drop to my knees, slap myself, and beg him through tears. "Please think of our son. Just trust me this one last time." I kept the pen and placed it back on the nightstand. "I'll pack my things and move out as soon as possible. As for my visitation rights, you don't deserve to be a mother," he interrupted coldly. "You're never seeing Leo again." I didn't look up. I just let out a soft laugh. I was actually about to say, "I don't want visitation rights either." The coldness in Austin's eyes didn't waver, but he shot me a sharp, questioning look. He couldn't comprehend my sudden indifference. For the past 4 years, he and our son were my entire world. Back then, if Leo so much as called Sienna, Auntie Sienna, one extra time, my heart would ache for days. Now I was giving him up without a fight. It wasn't like me. He let out a harsh sneer, seemingly finding a logical explanation for my behavior. "Throwing away your own flesh and blood for some cheap flings. Was this your plan all along? When you climbed into my bed and forced me to marry you?" Listening to his venomous words, I felt absolutely no desire to defend myself. The first time he caught me sleeping around in a hotel, I was completely blindsided. I had begged and screamed, swearing I had betrayed him. But Austin had always assumed I was obsessed with him. And since the man in my bed had fled, leaving only a blurry silhouette on the hotel security footage, Austin barely let it slide. Yeah, and he still took Leo away from me to see my son once a month. I had to schedule an appointment with Sienna a week in advance. During our short visits, Sienna would tail us like a warden. If I held Leo for a second too long, I had to watch her displeased face. Even buying toys or clothes for my own son required Sienna's prior approval, or they would never make it to Leo's room. The emotional abuse broke me, and soon after I was framed for a second time. I had taken a job to distract myself, but during a business trip, I woke up in a hotel room with a repulsive, overweight stranger drooling next to me. I called the police, but the medical exam showed I hadn't been assaulted. Despite the lack of physical evidence, Austin decided I was just caught before the crime could happen. From that day on, I wasn't even allowed to attend Leo's kindergarten parent-teacher meetings. Whenever the school called, Austin sent Sienna instead. He told me to stay home so I wouldn't embarrass the family. Even when our 4-year-old son pointed at my face and called me a bad woman, Austin just stood there saying nothing. And now the third time I was tired of this twisted game. I was ready to let them have each other. And yet he had the nerve to ask why I didn't want my own child anymore. Sienna walked up to Austin and whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "Austin, even though the prenup says she waives custody, in all my years of legal practice, I've never seen a mother give up her child so easily. Elena has cheated so many times, she probably planned this long ago. After all, a child is just baggage for a woman who wants to play around. Don't waste your breath on her." She looked up at me, a brief, heavy glint of triumph flashing in her eyes. I chuckled softly. She seemed to have forgotten 4 years ago. She was the one who drafted this absurd prenuptial agreement, specifically detailing the 3-strike cheating clause. Austin's face darkened. "You better mean what you say. Don't come crawling back on your knees begging me later." Leaving those cold words, he turned and walked out. I watched his retreating back, the corner of my mouth curling into a bitter smile. "I won't, Austin. My knees will never bend for you again." Sienna looked at me, a smirk playing on her lips. "Well, Elena, a night of romance is worth $1,000. We won't disturb you and your friend anymore." The moment the door slammed shut, the room fell into a heavy silence. I looked down at the unconscious man still snoring on the bed. A wave of nausea hit my stomach. I had woken up much earlier than them. I could have escaped before they caught me, but I was just so sick of this cat and mouse game. I wanted it to end. I threw on my coat and walked out without looking back. Next evening, I went back to the Vance mansion to pack my things. When I pushed open the master bedroom door, I realized all my clothes and personal belongings were gone. The maid stood there fidgeting nervously, not daring to meet my eyes. "Ma'am, your things have been moved to the backyard storage room," Miss Montgomery said. She said the master bedroom will have a new mistress soon, so we had to clear it out immediately. I smiled faintly. For years of marriage, and I wasn't even allowed a decent departure. I turned and walked toward the storage shed in the backyard. Pushing the door open, I saw boxes stacked upon boxes, trash bags piled high. I knelt down and began rummaging through them. One by one. Nothing else mattered. But I had to find my mother's antique sapphire bracelet. It was passed down from my grandmother to my mother, and then to me. It was the only thing in this godforsaken house that truly belonged to me. Finally, I found it at the very bottom of a dusty box. Clutching the velvet pouch tightly in my palm, I let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. Just as I was about to grab a few changes of clothes, a childish voice came from the doorway. "What are you doing?" I turned around. Leo was standing at the door. He looked exactly like Austin. His arrogant, condescending posture was a carbon copy of Sienna's. "Getting my things," I said quietly, turning back to my packing. Usually, even if he pushed me away, I would rush to hug and kiss him. But this time I was completely numb. "Those are not your things." Seeing me ignore him, he stormed inside. He stomped his dirty shoe right onto my scattered clothes. "Auntie Sienna said everything in this house belongs to Daddy. You are not allowed to take a single thing." I paused. "These are my personal belongings. You bought them with Daddy's money," he said, putting his hands behind his back. "Daddy's money belongs to the Vance family. Strangers have no right to it." A stranger. I looked up at him. My 4-year-old son was standing over me, looking at me as if I were a thief. The coldness in his eyes was even worse than Austin's. "I'm only taking one thing," I said, clutching the sapphire bracelet. "The rest can stay." "No." He stepped forward, blocking the doorway with his arms spread wide. "Can't steal from the Vances." "Leo, move." "No," he shouted. "You're a beggar." "A thief," Auntie Sienna said. "Once you leave, you can never come back. If you do, you're just here to steal." My temples throbbed, painfully. "I'm telling you one last time. Move." "No." "Give it to me." He lunged forward, grabbing the velvet pouch in my hand. I instinctively pulled back and the pouch ripped open. The antique sapphire bracelet slipped out, hitting the concrete floor. The delicate gold chain snapped, and the small diamonds framing the sapphire shattered into pieces. I froze, staring at the ruins. I remembered the day my mother put this bracelet on my wrist. She had said, "Elena, this has been in our family for 6 generations. Pass it down to your daughter or your daughter-in-law." I had no daughter, and I would never have a daughter-in-law. I only had this bracelet. It survived 6 generations only to be shattered by my own son. Leo stood beside me, suddenly murmuring under his breath, "It's your fault for not letting go." My eyes welled with tears as I looked at him. "I told you this was the only thing my mother left me. Do you even know why your mother is rotting in that hospice care?" Leo blinked, taking a step back. "I don't have a grandma. I only know she's a money-draining old hag." The blood rushed to my head. "Auntie Sienna said she stays in such an expensive room, wasting Daddy's money when she can't even be cured. She's just a black hole for money." "Say that again." My voice changed. It was so cold and hollow. Even I didn't recognize it. Leo was startled by my expression. He bit his lip but forced himself to yell. "She is a money-draining old hag. What are you gonna I shoved him. His foot caught on a box and he fell backward onto his butt. He froze for a second, then burst into loud, dramatic wails. "Daddy, Daddy." I stood there, my palms completely numb. Looking at my crying son on the floor. The words money-draining old hag echoed in my ears. That old hag was my mother, his grandmother. She was the one who, despite just undergoing major surgery, spent nights hand-knitting a baby blanket for him when he was born. She was the one who every year on his birthday would call from the hospital, begging the nurse to read her birthday wishes to him. And he called her a money-draining old hag. The sharp edges of the broken diamonds dug into my palm. The pain cleared my head. Austin rushed in, seeing Leo crying on the floor. He knelt down and scooped him up. "Leo, what happened?" Leo buried his face in Austin's chest, sobbing hysterically. "Daddy." She pushed me. "Kick her out." "I want Auntie Sienna." Austin held him, glaring at me. His eyes were filled with absolute disgust. "Elena, have you lost your mind? You're physically abusing a child now." "I didn't abuse him," I said quietly. "I just shoved him." "Is there a difference?" I looked down at the broken pieces of my mother's bracelet in my hand. Yes, I said. Abusing him would be me trying to discipline him as his mother. Shoving him was just him getting what he deserved. Austin stunned, looking down at his son. Leo shrank into his father's arms, his crying softening into a whimper. But I was just telling the truth. Auntie Sienna said, "That old woman is just wasting Daddy's money." Austin pinched the bridge of his nose. "Why are you picking a fight with a toddler?" He shot me an annoyed look. "Sienna manages our family finances now. She was just stating a financial fact. And Leo overheard it. Don't blow things out of proportion. You have no idea how much she stresses over managing this estate." He glanced at the broken jewelry in my hand. His tone softened slightly, though his annoyance remained. "I brought Leo here today so we could have a proper talk. But about the other thing, let's keep it from him for now. I don't want it affecting his mental health." I knew he was talking about the divorce. I remained silent. In the living room, Sienna was kneeling in front of Leo, gently consoling him. I walked past them expressionless. Behind me, Leo wailed louder. "Why is that bad woman ignoring me?" He stomped his feet, throwing a tantrum. He was used to me immediately crying, hugging him and apologizing every time he threw a fit. So when I didn't even spare him a glance, he felt wronged. Austin said nothing, but I could feel the icy glare burning holes in my back. I didn't stop. Just as I reached for the front door, his furious voice boomed through the hall. "Stop right there," I paused. "Come back here and apologize to Leo," he demanded. "You shoved him. You scared him." I closed my eyes, realizing this would probably be the last time we ever spoke. I didn't want to waste energy arguing. I walked back and knelt in front of Leo. "I'm sorry," I said, looking into his eyes one last time. "I shouldn't have shoved you." Leo sniffled, and suddenly he spat right in my face. A warm saliva slid down my cheek. He said in his cute, childish voice, "Dirty woman, you deserve it." Austin watched coldly, adding a flat remark. "You're so busy sleeping around that even your own son can't stand you." I slowly raised my hand, wiping my cheek. I let out a soft laugh. Me sleeping around? These 3 affairs were set up so poorly. Did he honestly not see the loopholes? Or maybe he did, but chose to ignore them because he wanted an excuse? Fine. If that's what he believed, so be it. We've been married for 4 years, Austin, and you've been parading around with her for 4 years. You even sent my son to stay at her place. Who is the one sleeping around here? We're getting a divorce. Can we stop lying to ourselves? Sienna's face drained. Of color. Tears welled up in her eyes instantly. "Elena, how could you slander me like this?" "Austin y Elena. It's been 4 years. Are you ever going to stop this drama?" Austin glared at me, taking a slow step forward. "Fine, since you're so convinced we're sleeping together." He grabbed my wrist, dragging me toward the bedroom. The grip on my wrist was ironclad, the metal of his wedding band cold against my skin. He threw open the door to the master bedroom, the room where we had slept for 4 years, though lately it had felt more like a courtroom, and shoved me inside. The door slammed shut behind us, cutting off the sounds of Leo's whimpering and Sienna's soft, performative murmurs of comfort. "Look at me," Austin commanded, his chest rising and falling with heavy, jagged breaths. I didn't look at him. I looked at the floor, where the faint outline of a dust ring showed where our shared vanity had stood just hours before. The room was already half cleared, stripped of any evidence that I had ever inhabited it. "I asked you a question, Elena," he said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "You think you can just throw dirt on Sienna's name to ease your own conscience? You think if you make up some sick story about us, it excuses what you did?" "I don't need an excuse, Austin," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the tears that used to choke me whenever he looked at me with this level of hostility. "I signed the papers. You have the house. You have the company. You have our son. Why are you still yelling?" "Because you're acting like a martyr," he snapped, grabbing my shoulders. His fingers dug into the fabric of my coat. "For 4 years, you clung to me like a parasite. You cried every time I stayed late at the office. You begged me to believe you. Now, suddenly, you're too dignified to even defend yourself? Who is he, Elena? The man from last night. Is he the reason you're finally letting go?" I raised my eyes then, meeting his gaze. For years, I had searched those dark eyes for a flicker of the man who had once promised to protect me. Now, all I saw was a stranger who had let his own pride blind him. "There is no one else, Austin. There never was." "Then why didn't you run last night?" His voice cracked slightly, a rare slip in his armor. "The maid said you woke up before the alarms went off. You could have walked out. You could have hidden him. Instead, you just sat there on the edge of the bed and waited for us to walk in." "Why?" "Because I wanted you to catch me," I whispered. He froze. His grip on my shoulders loosened just a fraction. "I wanted it to be over," I continued, my voice steady, almost gentle. "The first time, I spent 3 months in a state of near paralysis, terrified you'd leave me. The second time, I nearly drank myself to death trying to figure out how I ended up in that room. Last night, when I woke up and smelled the same cheap incense, when I felt the familiar heaviness in my limbs, I knew exactly what was happening. I realized I could either fight a battle I was drafted to lose, or I could just let the curtain fall. So I sat there, and I waited. Austin stared at me, his brow furrowed, trying to find the lie in my face. He was a man who dealt in logic, in contracts, in tangible assets. He couldn't comprehend a surrender that wasn't born of guilt. "You're crazy," he muttered, stepping back. "Probably," I agreed, reaching down to pick up my small handbag from the floor. "But I'm also tired. The divorce is signed, Austin. Let me go." He didn't move to stop me this time. He stood in the center of the half-empty bedroom, looking suddenly very small beneath the vaulted ceilings of his family home. As I turned my back on him and walked out, I felt the first real breath of air reach my lungs in 4 years. The backyard storage room was dark when I returned to it. I didn't want to risk running into Sienna or Leo again, so I moved quickly, scooping up the shattered pieces of my mother's sapphire bracelet and placing them into a small linen handkerchief. The gold links were bent, the tiny paved diamonds scattered like salt in the dust. As I walked down the long, winding driveway of the Vance estate, the iron gates clicked shut behind me. The sound was incredibly final. I took a taxi to the St. Jude Hospice Care Center on the outskirts of the city. It was nearly midnight when I arrived, and the corridors smelled of disinfectant and faded lavender. The night nurse, a kind woman named Sarah who had known me for the 2 years my mother had been resident here, looked up from her desk with a soft, sympathetic smile. "Late night, Elena?" "Just wanted to see her," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She had a quiet evening," Sarah said, tapping her screen. "Her vitals are stable, though she slept through dinner. Go on in." I walked down the quiet hallway to room 214. The room was small but bright, paid for by the astronomical fees the Vance Group's accounting department had previously cleared every month. My mother, Clara, lay in the center of the bed, her frame so thin she barely made a ripple beneath the white blankets. Her silver hair was neatly combed, her face pale but peaceful. I sat in the plastic chair beside her bed and took her hand. It was cold, the skin paper-thin. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered, the tears finally slipping down my cheeks now that there was no one around to weaponize them. "I couldn't save the bracelet. Leo, he broke it." Her fingers didn't move, but her chest rose and fell in a steady, slow rhythm. "And I'm sorry about the room," I continued, pressing her hand to my cheek. "I don't know how I'm going to pay for it yet, but I will. I promise you, I won't let them move you to a state ward. I'll find a way." I stayed there until the sky outside the window turned a pale, bruised purple. Before the day's shift arrived, I kissed her forehead, slipped out of the hospital, and began the search for a place to live. Finding an apartment in the city with no current income and a fresh divorce on my record was nearly impossible. I ended up in a cramped, second-floor studio in the old industrial district. The plaster was peeling, the radiators hissed like angry cats, and the window looked out onto a brick wall, but it was mine. I paid 3 months' rent in advance, using the small savings account my father had set up for me before he passed, an account Austin's lawyers hadn't been able to touch because it was in a trust. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me afloat while I looked for work. Before I met Austin, I had been an apprentice at Vandenberg's, one of the oldest jewelry restoration houses in the country. I had a gift for identifying precious stones and an even greater gift for rebuilding historical pieces that others deemed unsalvageable. I had given it all up when Austin told me a Vance wife didn't need to work in a dusty workshop with grease under her fingernails. On my 4th day in the studio, I unpacked my old magnifying visor, my tweezers, and my soldering iron from the single box I had managed to take from the storage room. I cleared off the small wooden kitchen table, set up a desk lamp, and untied the linen handkerchief containing the broken sapphire bracelet. Under the harsh white light of the lamp, the damage looked severe. The central sapphire, a 5-carat, untreated Ceylon stone of a deep, velvety cornflower blue, was miraculously unscratched, but the gold setting was completely crushed, and several of the surrounding accent diamonds were missing. I picked up a pair of fine-nosed pliers and began to work. For the first time in 4 years, the constant, low-humming anxiety in my chest began to fade. There was a logic to metal and stone. If you applied too much heat, the gold would melt. If you were too rough, the gem would fracture. But if you were patient, if you listened to the material, you could rebuild almost anything. By the end of the week, I had a lead. An old colleague from my apprentice days, Marcus, was now the head of acquisitions at the Gilded Loop, a boutique gallery that specialized in estate jewelry. I met him in a quiet cafe near the gallery. He looked older, with a few more gray hairs around his temples, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Elena," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "When I saw your name in my inbox, I thought it was a ghost." I heard you married. Well, I heard you retired. Retirements don't always last, I said, offering a small smile. I'm looking for bench work, Marcus. Restoration, appraisal, anything you have. I don't need a high salary, just steady hours. Marcus looked at me, his eyes lingering on my bare ring finger, then on the faint bruise on my wrist that was only now beginning to fade into a yellow-green smudge. He was too polite to ask, but he wasn't stupid. The market has changed, Elena, he said gently. A lot of the big houses use CAD and 3D printing now. Hand restoration is becoming a luxury service. I know, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black velvet box. But some things can't be fixed by a machine. I opened the box. Inside lay the sapphire bracelet. I hadn't tried to recreate the original Victorian design. Instead, I had melted down the damaged gold and forged a delicate, modern cage of white gold that seemed to suspend the sapphire in midair, held by tiny, interlocking claws. The remaining small diamonds were set into the band in a pattern that looked like a constellation of stars. It was raw, elegant, and entirely unique. Marcus picked up his loupe from his pocket, screwed it into his eye, and leaned over the box. He didn't say a word for nearly 3 minutes. He turned the bracelet over, examining the solder joints, the polish on the claws, and the alignment of the stones. When he finally took the loupe out, he looked at me with a mixture of awe and professional jealousy. You did this on a kitchen table, didn't you? I did. The setting is, it's incredibly precise, Elena. The tension on the central stone is perfect. If I didn't know better, I'd say this was the work of a master jeweler in Paris. He closed the box and pushed it back toward me. I can't hire you as a bench jeweler. My heart sank. Marcus, please. Because I need you as our senior appraiser and custom restorer, he interrupted, a grin breaking across his face. We have a vault full of estate pieces from clients who refuse to let anyone touch them because they're afraid of modern techniques. If you can do this with a broken family heirloom, you can handle our private clients. The base salary is $60,000, plus a 5% commission on every piece you restore. The relief was so sudden I felt dizzy. It wasn't the millions I had lived with as Austin's wife, but it was enough. It was more than enough to cover my mother's hospice fees and my rent. When do I start? I asked. Tomorrow, Marcus said. And Elena, welcome back. While my life was slowly falling into a new rhythm, the Vance mansion was experiencing a very different kind of shift. I learned later, through the quiet gossip of the domestic staff who still had my number, that my departure had not brought the peace Austin had expected. The first week, Sienna had moved her things into the guest room, claiming it was more appropriate while she transitioned into her new role. She had immediately hired an expensive interior designer to gut the master bedroom, ordering all the furniture I had chosen to be thrown into the dumpster. But Leo was not adapting well. For 4 years, I had been the one who woke up with him at 3 a.m. when he had nightmares. I was the one who cut his sandwiches into precise triangles, who knew that he couldn't stand the texture of wool sweaters, and who spent hours sitting on the floor of his playroom, quietly building block towers, just to let him knock them down. Sienna did none of these things. Austin. Sienna's voice carried down the hallway of the mansion one rainy Tuesday evening. She was standing in the doorway of Leo's bedroom, her hands on her hips, her perfect legal posture looking slightly frayed. He's throwing another tantrum. He won't eat his peas, and he refuses to put on his pajamas. Austin, who was sitting at his desk reviewing a merger document, didn't look up immediately. Just tell him he has to. He's 4, Sienna. Surely you can handle a 4-year-old. I am a corporate attorney, Austin, not a nanny, she said, her voice tightening. He's doing this on purpose. He's been screaming for the bad woman for 2 hours. Austin finally paused, his pen hovering over the paper. He asked for Elena? He doesn't know what he wants, Sienna said quickly, her eyes shifting. He's just spoiled. Elena spent 4 years coddling him, letting him run wild. Now that there are actual rules in this house, he's resisting. I'm just trying to establish some structure. Austin sighed, rubbing his temples. A headache had been blooming behind his eyes for 3 days. I'll talk to him. He walked down the hall to Leo's room. The floor was littered with plastic toys, and Leo was sitting in the corner, his face red and tear-stained, clutching a small, dirty teddy bear. Leo, Austin said, kneeling down. Why are you crying? Auntie Sienna made you a very nice dinner. I don't want it. Leo shrieked, kicking a plastic truck toward his father. It has green things in it. Mom always takes the green things out. Your mother isn't here, Leo, Austin said, his voice hardening slightly.
We talked about this.
She had to go away. She's a bad woman, Leo muttered, his voice dropping into a sullen pout, repeating the words he had been taught. She's a thief. Yes, Austin said, though the word felt surprisingly heavy in his throat. So, you shouldn't want her here anyway. Auntie Sienna is going to take care of you now. Leo looked up at his father, his large, dark eyes remarkably like Austin's. But Auntie Sienna doesn't play. She just looks at her phone. And she yelled at me when I spilled my milk. She said I was a stupid little brat when you were in the shower. Austin froze. He slowly turned his head to look at Sienna, who was standing in the doorway, her face pale. Austin, that's a complete lie, she said, her voice rising in panic. He's making things up to get attention. Children do that when they're angry. You know how manipulative Elena was. She probably taught him to say things like this before she left. Austin looked back at his son. Leo didn't look like he was lying. He looked terrified, shrinking back into the corner. But Austin had spent years trusting Sienna's judgment, her legal mind, her loyalty to his family. Don't lie, Leo, Austin said quietly. Auntie Sienna wouldn't say that. Leo stared at his father for a long moment. Then, with the brutal honesty of a child who realized he was entirely alone, he threw his teddy bear at Austin's chest. I hate you, he screamed. I want my mom. I want her to come back. Austin stood up, his face dark. He turned to Sienna. Get him some different food. Just make him stop crying. He walked back to his study, but when he sat down at his desk, the merger documents no longer made sense. The silence of the house was different now. When Elena had lived here, the silence had been peaceful, a background hum of soft footsteps, the smell of vanilla and lemon polish, and the quiet assurance that someone was always waiting. Now, the silence felt cold, sharp, and empty. 2 months passed. My work at the Gilded Loop had quickly become the center of my life. I had restored 3 major estate pieces, earning commissions that allowed me to pay off my mother's medical bills for the next 6 months in advance. I had also bought a small, second-hand workbench for my studio, where I spent my evenings designing my own line of jewelry. I looked different. The dark circles under my eyes had disappeared, replaced by a healthy color. I had cut my hair into a sharp, chin-length bob that made me look younger, more focused. I no longer wore the conservative, high-necked dresses Austin had preferred. Instead, I wore simple silk shirts, tailored trousers, and the jewelry I made myself. One Thursday afternoon, Marcus walked into my backroom workshop, holding a small velvet tray. Elena, we have a walk-in client who wants an emergency appraisal and restoration estimate, he said, his voice unusually formal. I told him you were busy, but he insists on seeing our senior restorer. He's a high-profile client. I can take a look, I said, without looking up from my microscope. Put it on the tray. Actually, a deep, familiar voice said from the doorway, I'd prefer to discuss it directly. My hand froze on the focus dial of the microscope. I slowly turned around. Austin Vance stood in the doorway of my workshop. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, but he looked different than he had 2 months ago. He had lost weight, the sharp angles of his jawline looking almost gaunt. There were faint, dark shadows under his eyes, and his hair, usually styled to perfection, looked slightly disheveled. He stared at me, his eyes widening slightly as he took in my appearance. He looked at my hair, my simple linen shirt, and the bright, sunlit workshop filled with tools and gem jars. Elena, he breathed. I stood up, keeping my movements calm and professional. I didn't smile, but I didn't scowl either. Mr. Vance, how can the Gilded Loop help you today? His eyes flickered at the coldness of my address. You're working here? I am the senior restorer, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. Please sit. If you have a piece you need appraised, I can look at it now. He didn't sit. He walked over to the desk, his eyes scanning the tools, the sketches of my jewelry designs, and finally landing on my face. You look different. I am different, I said. Now, what is the piece? Austin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, blue velvet box. He placed it on the desk and opened it. Inside lay a heavy gold signet ring, the Vance family crest carved into a large, dark green bloodstone. The stone was cracked down the middle, and the gold band was deeply scratched. Leo threw it down the stairs during a tantrum yesterday, Austin said, his voice quiet. The stone is historical. It's been in my family for 3 generations. I wanted to see if it could be repaired. I picked up the ring with my tweezers, screwed my loop into my eye, and examined it. The bloodstone is a natural fracture, I said after a moment. It can't be fused back together without leaving a visible seam. The only way to restore it is to recut the stone into 2 smaller pieces, or replace the stone entirely. The gold can be polished, but the structural integrity of the shank is compromised. I took the loop out and set the ring down. I can recommend a standard replacement, but it won't be the original stone. Austin didn't seem to be listening to my technical appraisal. He was staring at my hands. Where's your mother's bracelet? He asked suddenly. It's taken care of, I replied. I saw the pieces on the floor that night, he said, his voice dropping. I didn't realize it was the one your mother gave you. I thought it was just some jewelry you bought. It doesn't matter what you thought, Austin. It's broken, and now it's different. Just like everything else. Elena, we need to talk, he said, taking a step closer. He's not doing well. He's refusing to go to school. He's losing weight. He keeps asking for you. I felt a sharp tug in my chest, but I clamped down on it immediately. Leo has Sienna now. She is his legal guardian's partner. I'm sure she can handle it. Sienna doesn't know how to deal with him, Austin said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. She's a lawyer, she's busy with a firm. Elena, I'm willing to renegotiate the visitation terms. You can see him once a week.
No supervisión.
You don't have to go through Sienna anymore. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt a deep, profound pity for him. You still don't get it, do you? I said softly. Get what? I'm offering you what you wanted. You wanted to see your son, and I'm giving you that chance. You took my son away from me as a punishment, I said, my voice rising slightly, though it remained perfectly controlled. You let him call his grandmother a money-draining old hag. You stood by and watched while he spat in my face. You taught him that I was a dirty, worthless woman who could be bought and discarded. And now, because he is throwing tantrums and making your life difficult, you want to hand him back to me once a week, so I can fix the mess you made. He's a child, Elena. He didn't know what he was saying. He knew exactly what he was saying because he heard it from the adults in his life, I said. I loved Leo with every fiber of my being, Austin. But I cannot save a child who has been taught to despise me. If I come back into his life now, I am just the bad woman who comes to clean up his toys.
No.
You wanted custody. You have it. Austin's face drained of color. You're his mother. How can you be so cold? I learned from the best, I said, sliding the velvet box containing his cracked ring back toward him. I cannot repair your family ring, Mr. Vance. And I cannot repair your family. I suggest you find another jeweler. He stared at the box, then at me. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, to command me, to use the power of the Vance Group to force me to comply. But as he looked into my eyes, he saw nothing but a smooth, impenetrable wall of indifference. Without another word, he picked up the box, turned, and walked out of the gallery. The cracks in Austin's world began to widen into chasms over the next month. The catalyst was an audit. The Vance Group's board of directors had ordered a routine financial review of the estate accounts, a department that Sienna had taken over managing after my departure. Because she was Austin's personal attorney and the head of the legal team, she had been granted broad authority over the family trusts. It was during this audit that a senior accountant noticed a series of irregular payments. Mr. Vance, the accountant said, presenting a thick folder during a private meeting in Austin's office. We've flagged several high-value transactions originating from the primary estate account over the past year. They were classified as legal research and private consultation fees, but the recipients are unusual. Austin, who was rubbing his temples to fight off another migraine, frowned. What do you mean, unusual? 3 payments of $50,000 each were made to a private security firm called Vanguard Solutions, the accountant explained. But when we checked their registry, they aren't a security firm. They are a boutique private investigation agency specializing in reputational management and discreet setups. And there are also direct bank transfers to 2 individuals. The accountant slid 2 names across the desk. Who are they? Austin asked. One is a former actor named David Cole. The other is a man named Thomas Miller, currently unemployed, with a history of petty fraud. According to the wire transfers, they were paid substantial sums of money on dates that correspond precisely with the dates of your ex-wife's reported marital infidelities. Austin sat frozen, the room suddenly feeling incredibly cold. The transfers, Austin said, his voice barely audible. Who authorized them? They were authorized by Miss Montgomery, the accountant said. Using the power of attorney she holds for the estate. The silence in the office was deafening. Austin stared at the names on the paper. David Cole, the man whose blurry silhouette had been caught on the hotel security footage during the first affair. Thomas Miller, the overweight stranger who had been found in the hotel room during the second affair. The puzzle pieces, which had always felt slightly mismatched, suddenly locked together with a sickening click. Austin stood up, so quickly his chair rolled back and crashed into the mahogany credenza. He grabbed the folder, bypassed his secretary without a word, and stormed down the hallway to the legal department. He didn't knock. He threw the office door open. Sienna was sitting at her desk, dictating a memo into her phone. She looked up, startled by his abrupt entrance. Austin, what's wrong? You look. He slammed the audit folder onto her desk, right on top of her leather-bound planner. Explain this, he roared. Sienna frowned, picking up the folder. As she flipped through the pages, her polished, professional demeanor began to disintegrate. Her skin turned a sickly, gray color, and her fingers began to tremble. Austin, these are confidential legal expenses, she stammered, her voice rising an octave. I was protecting the company. I was. You paid them, Austin shouted, his voice echoing through the entire legal wing. You paid the man in the hotel. You paid the stranger from the business trip. You set her up, Sienna. Every single time.
No.
No. Austin, listen to me. Sienna stood up, reaching out to touch his arm, but he violently flinched away from her. I did it for you. She was holding you back. Elena was a nobody, a middle-class girl who climbed into your bed and forced you into a marriage you didn't want. She didn't fit into your world. I loved you, Austin. I've loved you since college. I drafted that prenup to protect you, and when you wouldn't leave her, I had to show you who she really was. She wasn't that person. Austin's voice cracked, a devastating realization washing over him. She never did any of it. She was innocent. And I took her son. I let him spit in her face. I let him call her mother a money-draining old hag. He looked at Sienna, and for the first time in his life, he saw her clearly. Not as his brilliant, loyal attorney, but as a parasite who had systematically poisoned his life from the inside out. You're fired, he whispered. And I'm going to make sure the Bar Association strips you of your license. If there is a single law you broke in orchestrating this, I will personally fund the prosecution to put you in a cell. Austin, please. Sienna cried, tears streaming down her face as she fell to her knees, reaching for his trousers. I did it for us. For Leo. Leo needs a mother who can help him, who can give him a future. Don't you dare speak my son's name, Austin hissed, stepping back. Get out of my building. Now. The rain was pouring in sheets when Austin arrived at the St. Jude Hospice Care Center later that evening. He didn't care that his expensive suit was soaked or that his shoes were ruined. He walked up to the reception desk, his face pale and desperate. I need to see Clara Montgomery, he said to the nurse. I'm her. I'm Austin Vance. The nurse looked at him, her expression turning cold. Mr. Vance, you're too late. Austin's heart stopped. What? Did she? No, she's alive, the nurse said, her voice laced with quiet disdain. But she was moved 3 days ago. Your legal representative, Miss Montgomery, stopped the funding for her private room last week. She told us the Vance Group was no longer responsible for her care. Where is she? Austin grabbed the edge of the desk. Where did they take her? Elena moved her, the nurse said, looking at him with deep disapproval. She paid the outstanding balance herself, in cash, and had her mother transferred to a specialized care home closer to her new apartment. She didn't want a single penny of your money touching her mother again. Austin let go of the desk, his hands shaking. He had thought he could fix this. He had thought that if he uncovered the truth, if he fired Sienna, he could go to Elena, present her with the evidence, and she would weep with relief. She would thank him for clearing her name, and they would go back to the way things were. But as he stood in the sterile, lavender-scented hallway of the hospice, he realized the terrifying truth. Elena hadn't been waiting for him to clear her name. She had already moved on. She had rebuilt her life from the ruins, and she had done it without him, without his money, and without his permission. The exhibition at the Gilded Loop was a massive success. The gallery was packed with the city's elite, the light from the chandeliers reflecting off the glass display cases. At the center of the room, on a velvet-lined pedestal, sat my first complete collection, Rebirth. It consisted of 12 pieces of jewelry, each one built around a damaged or flawed stone that had been restored and set into a modern, raw metal design. The centerpiece was the sapphire bracelet, which had already been marked as sold to a prominent museum curator. I stood near the entrance, wearing a simple, backless black silk dress, a glass of champagne in my hand. Marcus stood beside me, beaming. Elena, the curator from the Met wants to speak with you about a guest lecture series, he whispered. You're the star of the evening. Thank you, Marcus, I said, offering a genuine warm smile. But I think I'll take a minute to get some air first. I stepped out onto the gallery's second-floor balcony, looking out over the rain-slicked streets of the city. The cool air felt wonderful against my skin. Elena. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of his expensive cologne, the heavy cadence of his footsteps, I knew them too well. I turned slowly. Austin stood in the doorway of the balcony. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, his white shirt was slightly unbuttoned at the collar, and he looked completely exhausted. Austin, I said, my tone polite but distant. I didn't know you were on the guest list. I bought a ticket, he said, stepping out onto the balcony. The door clicked shut behind him, muffling the sound of the gallery chatter. I wanted to see your work. It's beautiful, Elena. Truly. Thank you. I know everything, he said, his voice cracking. He stepped closer, his eyes pleading, filled with a raw, desperate pain I had never seen in him before. I found the payments. Sienna, she set you up. All 3 times. I fired her. I'm taking her to court, Elena. I'm going to ruin her. I'm going to make sure she never practices law again. He expected me to be shocked. He expected me to cry, to gasp, to fall into his arms in relief. But I just took a sip of my champagne. I know, I said. Austin blinked, confused. You knew? Austin, I knew from the very first time, I said softly. The hotel key card that was mysteriously left in my bag. The business trip itinerary that only Sienna had access to. The cheap incense they used to drug my tea, it was the same brand Sienna kept in her office. I didn't have the proof, and even if I did, you wouldn't have believed me. You wanted to believe her, because she fit your world, and I didn't. Elena, I was blind. He reached out, trying to grab my hands, but I stepped back, letting my champagne glass rest on the balcony railing. I was an idiot. I let my pride get in the way. But we can fix this. I've already contacted my lawyers. We can void the prenup. You can have custody of Leo again. We can be a family. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll buy you a new house, a bigger workshop. Just please come home. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no resentment, no lingering spark of love. Just a profound, clean emptiness. I am home, Austin, I said, gesturing to the gallery behind us, to the city, to the life I had built with my own hands. But Leo is your responsibility, I said. You let Sienna poison him. You let him grow into a child who spits on his mother. It will take years of therapy and patience to help him undo that damage, Austin. And I wish you the best of luck with that. But I am not the cure for your mistakes. Elena, please, he whispered, a tear finally escaping his eye and rolling down his cheek. He looked so vulnerable, so completely broken, a far cry from the arrogant billionaire who had thrown the divorce papers at my face. Don't leave me like this. I love you. I smiled, a soft, genuine smile of closure. No, you don't, Austin. You love the woman who used to beg for your attention. You love the control you had over me. But that woman is gone. She died in that hotel room 2 months ago. I picked up my champagne glass, took one last look at the man who had been my entire world, and turned my back on him. As I opened the door to the gallery, the warmth, the light, and the sound of people celebrating my creation washed over me. I stepped back into my world, leaving him alone in the cold, silent rain.